Hello and welcome to another video. It's a little unexpected that I'm going to do another video this week, but I feel that it's not only necessary, but I feel like it's something that I want to talk about because I myself feel like I just need to put it out there. Something that I've come to really realize in the past couple of months, and really, I mean, for a very long time, I've got it intellectually. But I didn't feel it emotionally, and I didn't really connect with it in a personal way, and that is cultural appropriation. I don't mean to make light of it, because I feel like people are so quick, especially in the pagan community, to just dismiss claims of cultural appropriation as being somehow as being ridiculous, or as being something which really doesn't affect them because, well, of all manner of excuses, right? But I also want to talk a little bit about paradigm shifting, and I also want to talk a little bit about my own experience with cultural appropriation from one of my main traditions, which is Hinduism. So, the real reason I want to bring this up this week is my partner, John, had a situation earlier in the week where he was trying to defend and educate about a tradition that he has been practicing for 10-15 years. I believe it's 10 years. It's definitely more. Right now, and sorry John, I cannot remember exactly how many years. But he's been practicing it for a very long time. And he practices many different African traditional religions, which are ATRs. One is Vodou, Haitian Vodou. He's practiced Hoodoo in the past, and we both now have become involved in the tradition of an Afro-Cuban tradition called Lukumi, which amongst many other people is also known as Santeria. So Lukumi, he began his journey into Lukumi much earlier than I did, and as I've come to understand and learn, the spirits tend to drag partners in when these practices are taken up. So John has been working in African traditional religions and has been a part of bona fide lineages for a very long time. And something that continually comes up again and again and again and again and again is the relationship and the non-relationship between neopagans of mostly Western world and African traditional religions and practitioners of. And I had experiences earlier in the year where, and I have to say, I've been interested in orishas and African traditional religions and South American religions for a very long time since university. It's been really a very armchair thing for me, I have to admit that. It's something where I've read a few books, and I might have had a few conversations with a few people about it over the years, but it's not really something I pursued, and it's not something that was really, it came into my world. So that's my experience with it anyways. So earlier in the week, now John comes from a neo-pagan background as well. He was involved with Wicca originally when he was a teenager, and then he joined a very particular order, and because of the nature of this incident, I'm not going to say which one it was. It's really not my place to say. Really, the whole content of this video is just emphasized by this example. So, the month of November is dedicated to the Gedi, which is the lost Loa of Vodou, and the whole month there's celebrations called Fight Gedi, which usually are celebrations to honor the Gedi, the lost spirits, or those spirits who are not, who are no longer bound to a family, or are no longer honored, or are forgotten. So it's become very popular over the past 20 years, really, since a lot of these traditions have started to emerge into mainstream a little bit. It's become very popular for neopaganism especially to take up these traditions and become very interested in them, because on the surface level they look like polytheistic, they look like pagan traditions. So the incident the other day, and this is basically what happened, my partner posts onto his Facebook that this is the month of Fight Together, and he was talking about a little bit about what was involved. And a woman, an archpriestess from this tradition that he used to belong to, posted that she had attended a fight, a celebration, the other night towards the Giddy. So my partner asked her, "Oh, who did it? Which, who was the priestess? Who was the mambo?" And everything the woman said basically did not add up. It didn't correlate with what is usually done in Vodou. And when my partner asked her for this mambo's lineage, which is, it's one of those questions where it's not rude in these traditions to ask for the person's lineage. It's not an issue, because the majority of people who practice these traditions, and I'm starting to learn this, and I really appreciate this. It's a bit like scholarship. You're going to cite your sources of where your teachings come from, where these practices come from, because the nature of these traditions are information handed down from teacher to student to teacher to student. It's not written in books. It isn't written in textbooks. It is, but it's not like the majority of information is not given down that way. And part of the tradition is to keep that information alive by continually passing it down. And like any lineage tradition around the world, eventually you're able to trace back your spiritual lineage back until you're able to meet up with other people. So you'll meet, say, another mambo or a hukan who shares a great ancestral spiritual teacher, and so then you can piece together, and that keeps the community together. So nothing this woman, this archpriestess in this Wiccan tradition, was saying added up, and so John was trying to educate her, and she became defensive and began to harass him for it, basically stating that what he was saying was untruthful, or he was being rude or disrespectful or prejudicial, all of these things. She basically became defensive because she was not part of these traditions that John has been part of for more than 10 years. She doesn't understand them. She doesn't know anything about them other than what this other person, this mambo, was showing. And so John called her out for it and said, "It is irrelevant how you feel in this situation," because she at one point said, "Well, I feel like what she was saying was true." Well, it's irrelevant what you're saying. Nothing you've said here, and your defensiveness especially, shows that this individual may not be genuine. And if they're not genuine, then they are showing themselves as, or they're putting themselves out there as something that they're not, which is fraudulent, right? So there was a big blow up, and this woman left feeling quite, feeling defensive, and that was what the encounter was. And it strikes me that especially people in marginalized spiritual traditions keep having to have these conversations over and over and over and over again with neopagans specifically. And don't get me wrong, I love my neopagan people. I'm neopagan myself, or at least one aspect of me is. But the very nature of some of these traditions, especially African traditional religions, which I'm becoming part of, and I'm beginning to really appreciate and understand, is that no matter how much you feel as an outsider that you want to become involved, that you want to honor these orishas, or the loas in this case, no matter how much you want it, these traditions are lineage-based. These traditions are initiation-based. They are not open for the general public. They are not open to just anybody who wants to come along. The majority of it comes down to sanctity of knowledge, so knowledge passed down from teacher to student and so forth. It can not only be controlled, but it's like, it can't be distorted, it can't be, even if it changes slightly to suit, modern times, it's not going to be so distorted that it's going to just start to disintegrate. The issue when it comes to neopagans specifically, and I'm saying neopagans specifically here because that is who we're talking about here. The issue of neopagans is the view that, and it's a cultural view, I'm speaking to a friend about this today, neopaganism in the Western world tends to have this mentality that they need to resuscitate older traditions, and through that resuscitation it needs to either be to the letter or it needs to be brought to the modern world. But the majority of neopagan traditions, at least, are dead. They died a long time ago. There may be sprinklings of things here and there, but really they're dead. The line of continual practice stopped usually when Christianity came. So the resuscitation creates this need to recreate. And so in neopaganism, at least, there's this huge emphasis on personal gnosis, on intuition, and going based on feeling. And that's okay for those traditions. But when it comes to living traditions, it doesn't work that way. So especially with African traditional religions that I'm becoming part of, and that I'm becoming to really understand and appreciate, is that the sanctity isn't in belief necessarily, but it's in the right practice. What I've been told and what I learn through observation and also through now personal understanding, or at least slight personal understanding. I'm very, very new on this journey, and I might look back on this video in 10 years' time and think, well, he's coming from a place of ignorance. But my perception is that a huge part of carrying the tradition, the responsibility of perpetuating the tradition to the next generation and passing it down from our teachers to eventually perhaps our students, is in learning it through the hard way. Not just taking what we want, taking the whole tradition as is, perhaps challenging aspects here and there that just don't seem right in the moment, but definitely not ignoring things because of our cultural baggage. And I say that as a white person starting a journey into Lukumi, which has its origins and the majority of its base in Nigeria and the land of the Yoruba people. So when it comes to cultural appropriation, and I think this is what I really want to just put out there, it's this idea of there is an issue in neopaganism, and I see it so often perpetuated on the extreme end Facebook groups, which I know I should not be part of anymore because they just frustrate the hell out of me. This idea that, well, any cultural practice in the world is up for grabs. The world is just a giant buffet of spirituality, and people can take whatever they want, which isn't true. that personal gnosis and personal feelings trump any sort of idea of lineage-based integrity or orthopraxy. And I have theories as to why in the neopagan and Wiccan community these feelings and this belief system is out there, that it doesn't matter what happens, as long as you go based on what your feelings are, or you can take from any tradition that you want because your feelings are there. And there's some really ridiculous bullshit excuses being put out there, such as, I've heard this over and over again, well, my intention is to be honouring of these traditions, but I'm not so-and-so, so I can't practice it such a way. Another is that people are so unaware of their own cultural, social place that they end up skimming things off the top. And I've seen this with Hinduism for a very long time. Hinduism was the... Oh, I think there's a mouse behind me and I don't like it. I started practicing Hinduism when I was about 16, 17. I learned, or at least I originally learned about Hinduism from a brown guy, my friend Rahim, who I haven't spoken to him in years and years, but he was from the Ismaili Muslim community, but he was also Wiccan and he was also very interested in Hinduism. I never actually had a conversation with him about why he was interested in Hinduism, but also, I mean, his ethnic background, I should say, was originally Hindu several centuries ago, so it could also have been that. But he introduced me to worship of Shiva and Kali, and so on my own, at least, I started to practice, and it was very clumsy in the beginning, because I was a white boy in Canada, not connected with the Indian community at all in any way, and I was just basically going off of books. As I started to deepen my connection with Hinduism and I started really practicing, I had this sense that I wanted to be authentic, and so in that search for authenticity, it actually led me to a very firm place in my practice of beliefs, and I was very conscious of what I was practicing. Was it authentic? Was it true? Was it honoring the gods that I was honoring? And was it based in a cultural mindset? And so part of that, taking up that tradition, was to learn about the cultural context and understand why certain practices were important and all of these. So when I took up Hinduism, again, as a white boy, right, I did not feel a pushback from the Indian community, mostly because very early on, and even into my middle 20s, I never connected with the Hindu community. You know, I would go to shops and I would buy murtis and I would buy this and I would buy that, but it was a very home-based practice. When I met, Indian friends in university and college, they would be quite shocked and I feel like they wouldn't really know what to say. I think they were flattered that I would take such an interest in the tradition, and I never received any negative criticism about it. But I think that was because I took it seriously. I didn't just have Ganesha on my yoga mat, or I didn't have Shiva on a lunchbox or something like that, right? So I took it seriously. I learned as much as I could, and I really developed an understanding. As much of an understanding as a white guy in Canada in the early 2000s, could gain, right? But I feel really comfortable with that practice. What frustrates me, and this is a bigger conversation, but what frustrates me is that so many Indian traditions are co-opted by white Westerners that have no business doing so. So, Kali, for example, is a very big goddess in especially neopaganism. And yet the people who worship Kali, who work with her, and I've seen some atrocious examples, they do so from a Wiccan standpoint. They don't understand her in her cultural context, and they also don't understand her within her spiritual context. They see her as this big bad goddess that's dark and she's amazing, and she is. Don't get me wrong, she is amazing. You are amazing, but they don't see her within the context of these sects. They don't understand her in the context of religion, and they just skim off the surface. And this is the same with Ganesh. Ganesh is the exact same thing. People take up Ganesh as this door opener. Do puja to Ganesh, which is just ridiculous because you're not actually offering. Like, I've seen examples of people not actually offering anything, and it's just like this mentality that it's a buffet that they can take and take. Now, Indian traditions especially are a little different than African traditional religions because of colonization, because of colonialism. Western scholars, and especially because of Spiritism and Theosophy, they really just wedged themselves right into those traditions, blasted open the door, and took as much as they wanted. And in many ways, the Western occult owes a great debt to that, because so much Indian esotericism and Indian traditions were taken, co-opted, and now 200 years later we're stuck with people on witchcraft boards saying the rule of three of karma and all of this crap, right? If I sound jaded, I am, because what I'm developing an understanding of the frustration that Olorishas and Vodou Saints and practitioners of all the ATRs that I know of, at least, the frustration is that people who don't have any real interest in the community, that don't have any real interest in the religion as a whole, are approaching, taking what they want, ripping it away from the tradition that they belong to, and then they're excusing themselves by saying that, well, nobody owns these, or I'm honoring these traditions, how dare you say I can't, or, and I've heard this, and I've seen this one online too, now that I'm aware of it, now that I'm seeing it, it's that whole idea of, well, you're bringing in race-based politics into this. It's an issue because when you take something out of the cultural context that it evolved within and evolved around, you're ripping it away from the context and the understanding. And when you practice something that you don't understand, you are liable to do a lot of damage to yourself, and you're liable to do a lot of damage to the tradition at large. People don't get why cultural appropriation is so damaging, because they are coming from a sense of entitlement and privilege. I feel like the label of cultural appropriation is overused. I think that it's applied to different circumstances which don't call and are not cases of cultural appropriation. But that being said, it is a reality. It is something that actually does go on. And for the white people who are watching this right now, no, I'm not going to say that. No. For anybody who doesn't belong to a spiritual tradition. Because really, when it comes to this, cultural appropriation is not about race. It's about culture. A lot of times people conflate it, because many times race is about culture. But at the same time, race is also not about culture at the same time, right? And a lot of times people make that mistake. If you don't belong to a tradition that is alive, and it took me a long time to really realize this, if you don't belong to a tradition that is alive, you have no business practicing anything from that tradition unless you put in the work to become part of that tradition. And unfortunately, I find within the NeoPagan community, especially, and the New Age community, don't even get me started on the New Age community, there is not that willingness to connect with the community that practices. There is not that willingness to take up and put yourself into that place of vulnerability. And in not doing so, you really are doing damage, because there will be cases where you will be doing a practice thinking that you've got it right, and you don't, and you're perpetuating the view that this is right, and it isn't. And by doing that, you are not only disrespecting the tradition and the people involved in these traditions, but you're disrespecting the spirits. And that's, I think, underlines the most fundamental difference. And, I've had some very uncomfortable conversations with people who didn't know me very well yet. My padrino is one of those people who didn't know me yet, and so assumed that because I was neo-pagan, or at least I was coming from the neo-pagan world, that I would see the gods in a certain way, that I would see spirits in a certain way, and that's mainly that they are archetypes. And it is very different, I think, when one comes from a place of a deity, a spirit, an angel, an orisha, a loa, a bodhisattva, a deva, or whatever you want to call them, that they are archetypes, because an archetype can't get pissed off. An archetype can't turn around and smack you for being disrespectful. An archetype can't become enraged because you offered them something which is disrespectful, right? An archetype can't do that. A living spirit can. And so that, I think, is one of the major differences between neo-paganism and a lot of religions around the world. There is no sense of these beings, these these discarnate entities, as being living, sentient beings. Now, that being said, in the pagan view, I can understand why some groups would stick to that mentality, because of psychology. But I think that really underlines it. So when a marginalized group sees their spirits, their gods, their loas, their orishas, their nats, their bodhisattvas, whoever, being taken by people who have not done the hard work to actually become part of a tradition, and that's assuming that they would even be accepted in the first place, they practicing things that they have not earned, rituals they have not fully learned, and offering things which are wholly inappropriate, it's going to cause, again, that sense of feeling of violation. And especially for traditions which already had gone through that and keep going through that because of the slave trade and because of the mass kidnapping of so many people from their homes and transportation, the trauma of slavery going down and continuing, to have people just take willy-nilly again without doing the hard work, it's soul killing. And that leaves me with that feeling of disgust. I feel disgusted. I feel understanding, because I can now feel and understand that urgency of not letting people who don't belong to these traditions. I can't speak for Vodou because I'm not part of Vodou, but as somebody who is now starting on the road to Lukumi, and understanding that our spirits and our orishas are served in very particular ways, and that they are not just archetypes, they are living spirits and entities who have loves and whims and needs and all of those things, to be taken up by people who have not gone through that process of learning and paying due respect and all of this. It's not only disheartening, it's also very aggravating. And yet it keeps happening over and over and over again. And I think it will continue to happen over and over and over again. So I want to backtrack a little bit. I didn't realize that this video would be such a long video, but it's something that has really enraged me, because I feel like I get now why so many people in the past who have been part of these traditions have been quite cold to me, because I was a neopagan. Not disrespectfully cold, but they were quite on guard. And my partner was one of those people when I first was getting to know him. So at the beginning of the year, I posted a photo gallery on my Facebook page of various different figures from South America, the Caribbean, and the South. And some of them are Catholic saints, some of them are pre-Columbian spirits, and some of them are orishas, loas, and various different spirits from all these different Caribbean and Afro-Cuban and African diasporic and traditional religions. And I labeled the photo album as folk spirits and gods. And so I posted these. I wrote little descriptions of who they all were, and for me, at least in that mindset, I thought I was being respectful, I thought I was being honoring, and I wasn't, because I mislabeled many of these figures, not as what they were, but as what I thought they were. And this is where the misunderstanding came in. So somebody who I wasn't friends with saw this photo album, because I made it public, and they wrote down that it was disrespectful for me to label some of these figures as folk saints, because they're not folk saints, they're orishas, and orishas are not folk saints. And so at that time, and I'll be honest, I became very defensive. I didn't write it to this individual, but I became like, I felt that defensiveness go up, because, well, how dare she try and pick on me, how dare she try to pick on me. So instead I decided, well, I see what she's saying, and so I started talking to her, and we had a really great conversation, and it was a very insightful conversation. For me, although I've been, like, I've studied, well, I hadn't really studied it. It was a few books, let me be honest here. But I had an interest all these many years. And so for me to gain that insight from an actual practitioner, it was amazing, because it was like, she was very very gentle with me. And it's funny, because my padrino in Lukumi apparently had seen it as well, and was seeing it. And so we had this really brilliant conversation. I gained a lot of appreciation out of it, and I understood where she was coming from. I didn't really understand where she was coming from, because it's one of those, when you live in a sense of entitlement, when you live in a sense of privilege, and when you don't belong to a tradition, you can't really fully appreciate what somebody says. And so that was that. So I changed the name of the photo album. Only so many months later, all these months later, do I realize that although that one educational moment for me was very uplifting. It was very interesting. It was very great. I don't know. I'm just assuming here, and so I'm going to ask her anyways. I'm not going to say her name because she might be watching this. She might not be watching this. I don't know. I think my padrino might watch this. I don't know, but I understand now how exhausting that must be to go through those conversations again and 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 again, over and over and over again, with people who are not part of these traditions, don't understand them, don't understand the cultural background, don't really, and there's tons of books out there that are written that are just crap, right? So they don't understand these practices, and so the need and the want to make sure that people are not misrepresenting or not misunderstanding religion, because the religion, especially the Lukumi, has only really in the past 20, 30, 40 years really come out. It's a very home-based tradition. It's a very secretive tradition. Secretive because it had to be, because of the history of Cuba and the history of the slave trade. At least as far as I understand it. There's a lot for me to still learn about that history, and I place myself into a humble position to learn that. But based on the very small amount that I do know, that's one reason. But to have those conversations again and again and again and again and again, over and over and over again, it's an uphill battle, and it's exhausting, and so I can understand why so many people just decide, I'm not having that conversation. And so many people in these traditions, now that I'm actually emerging into these communities, seeing the insider point of view, I can see how exhausting, because even that one conversation between this archpriestess, Wiccan archpriestess who called herself, titles that were just over the top, and my partner, I felt his exhaustion, I felt his frustration, I saw that she wasn't getting it. I saw that she wasn't open, and I think that's really what really killed me about the whole conversation, was the belligerence, the violence, the arrogance of not wanting to listen, not wanting to try to bridge and understand. Now, that being said, there are many pagans I personally know, and I would say a good chunk of the pagans on my Facebook page are this type, where they will respectfully listen, they will respectfully understand, and they will, when asked not to, will not continue a practice unless they learn more about it. There's also a lot of the pagans, I'm not saying on my Facebook page, but there's a lot of pagans in the world, a lot of New Agers in the world, who will just basically say, well, nobody really owns these traditions, so I can take what I want. That is what causes the exhaustion. That mentality of, I can do what I want because I've decided that I can do this, is the disrespect. And that disrespect is the frustrating bit, because it will continue on and on and on and on and on. And so I don't know really what the outcome of this could be. This is a conversation that's been going on for more decades than probably I've been alive, and I can understand now why so many ATR folk just probably do not interact with pagans and Wiccans. When I was first starting to become part of this tradition, there was a great feeling of, oh well, you're a pagan, can you really understand this? And now that I'm actually an accepted member of an Ile, and had conversations with my padrino around, seeing the tradition as it is, understanding the orishas in the way that they're meant to be understood, and the reality of them, and not bringing all that cultural pagan baggage with me. I feel like I can understand now why so many wouldn't want to interact with the pagan community. And I mean, I've had conversations with my ATR friends, John especially, because there's a potential he'll become a very big part of my life, and we'll be sharing these practices. And so, but I'll also be sharing the pagan part of my life with him, and it's almost that feeling of how much do I really want to put out there. And I guess I'm doing it now by having this conversation through this YouTube video. How many people will actually sit and watch a 40-minute YouTube video? Probably not many, but I feel at least a little better having put it out there. For the past probably 6 weeks, I really debated on how much I really wanted to put out there that I was starting to become part of Lukumi. What purpose would it serve? Well, I can tell right now the purpose of me saying this and explaining this is because I feel like this is going to become and is becoming a big part of my life, and it frustrates me. It frustrates me that somebody I care about so deeply would be called prejudiced because he said to a Wiccan archpriestess who felt like she knew more about the tradition than he did, that he was prejudicial because he was trying to educate her and possibly also explain that asking for a lineage is what most people in ATRs do in order to understand where certain practices come from. ATR, I cannot speak for most ATRs because really I'm not part of them. I can't speak for Voodoo, only Voodoo Sants can. I can't speak for Palo, I can't speak for Umbanda, I can't speak for any of those. But in my tradition, there is such an emphasis on lineage because that's where our information is being handed to us from. And so to ask somebody else who are your teachers is not disrespectful, because if that other person is doing something different from you, then you can understand where they got that information from. And eventually in a tradition that's set up like this, there will be deviation, there will be branching out, and practices will be incorporated that aren't necessarily shared with other members of the tradition. But asking for that lineage base, asking that question of what's your lineage, is it's like citing your sources when you write an academic paper. You're not just going to present something as truthful and right without being challenged. Well, where did you get this information from? And in neopaganism, people don't ask that question enough, and so we see frauds, we see charlatans, we see people who are just basically making things and shit up as they go along, and people aren't challenging them because they don't want to be disrespectful. So this has turned into more of a rant than anything else, and I really didn't get a chance to talk about paradigm shifting. But I think this sort of underlines for me, to talk a little bit about paradigm shifting, this underlines for me this idea that that when you enter into a tradition, you have to take it in its entirety. If you feel drawn to a tradition, do the respectful thing. Try to become part of it, and if you're not allowed to become part of it, understand why you can't become part of it. With Hinduism, Hinduism is a very different case from Lukumi. Hinduism was pretty much recreated from the ground up by colonialism, which recreated it into a buffet, right? But that being said, the Hinduism that we see in the West is not the same as what's in India. The Hinduism that you experience at your yoga studio is not the Hinduism of the temple. When you go in and really become part of the Indian community, you are experiencing cultural dialogues with the tradition that don't happen when you're not part of that tradition. And so, like, for me, when I sit down and I worship my gods, when I worship Shiva and Kali and Durga and Parvati and Skanda and all of them, I do it within a cultural framework that has been handed down for centuries over and over and over again. It's a living tradition. Neopaganism, because the majority do not have living traditions yet, and yet, I mean, that's going to change in 200 years' time. If some of these traditions are out there, continue, they will be living traditions. But you just can't take bits and pieces and rip them away from your cultural, from their cultural context, because A, it won't make sense, and B, you'll just end up being disrespectful to the spirits you think and the gods you're thinking you're worshipping. So, long story short, to sum it all up, if you feel like you want to become part of a tradition, if you feel drawn to it, do the right thing and find a genuine teacher from that tradition. Don't be disrespectful. And if the community looks at you and says, no, we don't want you, accept it. Because trying to force your way into a tradition and trying to practice a tradition where you're not wanted is not going to help anyone, and it's not going to help you. So there it is. I will talk a little bit about paradigm shifting next video, because I feel frustrated and I feel like I've ranted for way too long. So those of you who are continuing to watch this video, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Goodbye.